Welcome to the 10-minute series of videos related to competency-based programs. My name is Madeline Bazurgi from the Office of Academic Development at Dawson College, and I'm pleased to present Two Types of Competencies, a focus on the elements. In programs whose objectives are the development of competencies, the target of instruction is not just knowledge and skill, but also the development of competency. In this presentation, we will examine how the way a competency is formulated will inform its development and assessment. But first, let's quickly review the concept of the competency. The Ministry of Education defines competency as an ability to act, either to perform work-related tasks in the case of technical or career programs, or to use the knowledge and skills in a given situation in the case of pre-university and general education competencies. The competency is an ability. It is developed through learning activities that develop the student's knowledge, skills, and attitudes. But it's not just about accumulating a baggage of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Learning activities also give students ample opportunities to put their knowledge and skill to work, to find problems, to solve problems, to perform a task, or to respond to a given situation. And competencies are exercised at different cognitive or psychomotor levels described by Bloom's taxonomy. A student exercising creativity to write a short story will mobilize different cognitive skills than a student recalling historical facts. We've seen that competencies are defined as a set of objectives and standards broken down into elements of the competency. So what are the elements of the competency? They are broad or general objectives to be met by the student, and they are general enough to be applicable to a variety of situations. There are two ways in which the Ministry of Education formulates the elements of the competencies. A program may have a few of these competencies whose elements reflect loosely related objectives to be met. Let's call them mini-tasks. They are self-contained actions with perhaps weak or non-existent links between each element. For example, in the computer science program, the competency Use Office Productivity software has the following elements. A student exercising this competency should be able to produce reports, tables and graphs, diagrams or plans, and share and synchronize documents, most likely across a network. Elements 1 and 5 could possibly be developed together using Word and SharePoint, element 2 with Excel, element 3 with a flowchart application, and 4 with PowerPoint. Developing one element does not depend on developing the other. The competencies your course develops are most likely formulated the second way, where the elements of the competency refer to a sequence of actions representing a cumulative cognitive process or procedure. For example, this English competency, analyze and produce various forms of discourse, reflect the cognitive process the student goes through when exercising the competency. Each element builds on the previous. In this case, the resulting outcome is some sort of written work. But to achieve this result, the student must first build their foundational knowledge and be able to analyze existing literary text. Then they are in a position to articulate their own ideas on paper or any other medium, and finally, as all good writers do, revise their work probably several times. You can see how the elements progress by successive additions, each one subsuming the previous. Intentionally identifying the type of competency will help you choose the appropriate competency development and evaluation strategies. Keep in mind that the tasks or actions, the cognitive processes or procedures are undertaken by the student. They are the result of instruction and not the instruction itself. In fact, the elements do not refer to a learning sequence or learning steps. Rather, they are the actions students take when exercising the competency at an entry level on the job market or in the pursuit of university studies. The elements of the competency and the performance criteria serve as a guide for developing learning activities, and these range from foundational knowledge building to skill and attitude development. If you can imagine each element as a standalone objective, then the competency is formulated as discrete actions or mini tasks. If there is a progression over time where each element builds on the next, it is a competency of the second type. Let's take a look at more examples. In this example, the elements of the social science competency apply academic work methods to the social sciences are a collection of loosely related objectives. There's no real progression from one to the other. To say that a student has achieved this competency is to say that they're able to do all of these actions, to demonstrate an understanding of social science texts, to perform a literature search, to write in a style specific to social sciences, use technologies, work in a team, and present ideas orally. Although one can imagine assessing each element separately and adding up the marks, if this competency was developed in a single course, it would be preferable to create a final assessment activity where the student be required to integrate learning. For example, students working in groups will be required to research a topic or issue and write a paper to present a summary at the end. Each student is responsible for a chapter and for presenting their part using a variety of technological tools, simulating an authentic situation where a group of writers contribute book chapters. But we'll get back to this in another video. When the elements of a competency of this type are distributed to be developed by different courses, programs will have to decide what it means to attest to the achievement of this competency. The other competency from the diagnostic imaging program reveals a progression over time. When analyzing an X-ray or ultrasound, for example, the student leverages foundational knowledge of anatomy and their understanding of what a normal anatomy looks like on an X-ray or other imaging modalities. The ultimate objective that subsumes the others is element 4. Students should be able to establish links between anatomy and its conversion to a radiographic ultrasound or MRI. You can see here it is a cumulative process, leveraging foundational knowledge and their understanding of what a normal or abnormal anatomy looks like. Here's a last example of a work-related competency formulated as a progression, but where the elements describe the steps of a procedure. And some of the elements, for example 5, 6, and 7, can be considered mini tasks or objectives that are loosely related to each other. The tasks, however, are far from mini. This competency depends on the development and mastery of other program competencies. Carry out quality control activities, describe the anatomical and physiological characteristics of biological samples, perform pre-analytical procedures to prepare samples of body fluids for biomedical analyses, and establish professional relationships in biomedical analysis. The elements are objectives to be met, but what are the performance criteria? How do we know that the objectives have been met? The competency statement and its elements are formulated in a general fashion so that they can be applied to a variety of situations ranging from low to high complexity. The objectives can be subject to a variety of interpretations because of their general nature, unless we specify performance criteria. The performance criteria are the criteria by which to judge the achievement of the objectives, but they also guide the teacher by indicating the depth of knowledge and skills required to meet the objectives, at a level appropriate for entry level to the occupation or for the pursuit of university studies. For example, the first element can be developed with Microsoft Word. One can learn Word at an introductory level, just enough to produce reports for a computer science project, or at an expert level that a documentation specialist would need. By inspecting the performance criteria, you can determine just how far to develop the student's use of Word. Some performance criteria are broad, like compliance with presentation standards. This means something different to a social science graduate than it does to a computer science graduate. The program entrusted to develop this competency will need to decide what those presentation standards will be, keeping in mind the goals of the computer science program and the context in which Word will be used in the occupation. When planning how a competency will be developed, keep in mind the amount of time dedicated to developing a competency and its elements. In this example, where learning Microsoft Word will help students meet the first element, there's a difference between developing the knowledge and skills to help meet that one objective to produce reports with its few performance criteria, and a competency with several objectives directly tied to the use of word processing software. One is to learn how to use a tool to write reports, and the other is to learn the tool inside and out. And now for a word of caution. And this applies to all programs and all competencies. Some programs decide to dedicate an entire course to a single performance criteria, believing that students need an extensive amount of foundational knowledge or skills to meet the objectives. Sometimes those decisions are based on preserving existing courses during a program revision rather than developing the competency as expressed in the ministerial devis. I would caution against building an entire course on a single performance criteria. The criteria must be tied to the objective to be met and not the other way around. For example, and this is an exaggerated example, a person interpreting the criteria for element 1, proper integration of images, may suggest that students learn Photoshop to do a better job of editing images before inserting them in a document, thus exaggerating the intent of the performance criteria and neglecting the objective and the context in which the competency is exercised. In our case, in the occupation of being a computer programmer and not a photo editor. In the next part of this presentation, we will explore different competency development models based on the type of competency and provide options for assessments that will facilitate attesting to the student's achievement of the competency. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you stay tuned for the next presentation.